Welcome to our chapter concerning household decision next. So chapter 8 is looking at why individuals and households make decisions. Why do we consume certain goods versus other goods, or certain services versus other services? It has a lot to do with the utility that we gain from consuming those goods and services. And in economics, utility is defined as satisfaction gained from consuming a good or service. A lot of times we need to look at the marginal utility of our consumption. Marginal utility is the additional satisfaction from the consumption of another unit of a good or service. So if I eat one hamburger, I'm going to get a certain amount of utility from doing that. If I eat two hamburgers, I'm going to have a certain amount of total utility from eating those two hamburgers. But I'm going to have a different amount of utility associated with eating the first hamburger versus eating the second hamburger. One of the rules that we'll notice is that we don't consume anything, whether it's a good or a service, if there is no marginal utility associated with it. So to compute marginal utility, we're just going to be looking at the change Marginal utility is measured as the change in total utility from the consumption of one good to the next. So therefore, if I had the total utility of eating two hamburgers being 10 utils, I might say that the marginal utility of eating the first is 5 utils. Well, let's be straight with our diminishing marginal utility function. So 7 utils. And then the marginal utility of eating the second hamburger would then be 3 utils, which is 10 minus 7 gives us 3 utils. So if the marginal utility of eating a third, what this would say is that we'll eat 1, 2, but we will not eat a third hamburger because there is no marginal utility associated with eating that third hamburger. And this prescribes to the concept of diminishing marginal utility. As we consume more and more of a good or service, our marginal utility declines. Less utility is gained from the next unit than the previous unit, and it's implying satiation. So something that might have come up as a question for you, especially when working on the quizzes, is how do I solve for a consumer's optimal choice given some options? How do we maximize their total utility? So we're always going to maximize the total utility given two options and knowing the prices for those choices. We also will need to have a budget for the consumer. And we're going to use this rule where the price of one item divided by the price of another item will be equal to the marginal utility of the first item divided by the marginal utility of the second item. We call this consumer equilibrium. And really what it's saying is, if you think about it, we're only going to pay, for example, twice as much for something if it gives us twice as much utility. We'd pay 3 times as much for something if it gave us 3 times as much satisfaction. So we'll consume items until the ratio of their prices is equivalent to the ratio of the marginal utility we gain from consuming the items. So in trying to maximize total utility given a couple of options, their prices, and a budget, we need to first establish the budget and know the prices for the items. We'll then compute marginal utilities, compute the marginal utility per dollar for each item, which is the marginal utility on price, and choose the items with the most utility per dollar until our budget is spent. So let's look at an example that was actually from your quiz. This could probably help you with the other examples in the quiz. Here what we're talking about is somebody who is either going to the movies or taking a yoga class. And we're going to assume that this person has a budget of $24 and yoga classes cost $3 and movies cost $8. So we want to know how many yoga classes will a person go to and how many movies will they attend. We're also given their total utility. So if I go to no movies, I will have no satisfaction from doing that. If I go to one movie, I will have 40 total utils of utility. If I go to 5 movies, I'm going to have 160 utils obtained from watching those 5 movies. The same goes for yoga. For different amounts of yoga classes that I'm going to take in this time period, I'm going to gain total utility from doing it. If I go to 4 yoga classes in a week, that's going to yield 92 utils of satisfaction. So the first thing we want to do is compute marginal utility. And marginal utility is going to be the difference between total utility from the consumption of one good to another. So how much does our utility increase when we move from no movies to one movie? We're going to see that the marginal utility of the first movie is 40. Now the marginal utility of the second movie is going to be equal to the total utility of the second at the second movie minus the total utility at the first movie, or 35. And so when we solve for these, we see that we are adhering to the principle of diminishing marginal utility. Each movie we watch is becoming less and less satisfying to us, but they still are satisfying, so we are still continuing to go to the movies. Now let's look at the marginal utility of our yoga classes. That first yoga class is going to give us 30 utils of satisfaction. The second will give us 25, the third 21, and so forth and so on, until really that 8th yoga class is only giving us 1 util of satisfaction. And so you could say, well, the movie is much more satisfying than the yoga class. Here, obviously, the movie is way more satisfying than the yoga class, but we want to look at all of these figures per dollar spent. How much satisfaction am I getting per dollar? So we know that movies cost $8, so we're going to divide the marginal utility of the first movie, the second movie, through the 5th movie by the price of movies. And we see that that first movie is giving us 5 utils per dollar spent. So when we're sitting through the movie, it's an eighth over. We have gained 5 utils of satisfaction on that first dollar. However, when we're watching the 5th movie during this given time period, we're only going to get 3.75 utils of satisfaction per dollar. Now, in order to compare apples to apples or movies to yoga, we need to dollarize them, and so we're going to do the same for yoga. If I'm getting 30 utils of satisfaction and going to a yoga class, well, how many utils of satisfaction am I going to get per dollar that I'm spending? It looks like initially I'm actually getting a lot more satisfaction going to the yoga classes than I am going to the movies. I'm getting 10 utils of satisfaction per dollar for attending a yoga class, and only 5 utils of satisfaction per dollar for the movies. So let's take a look at this. How would we solve for the optimal mix for this consumer of both movies and yoga classes in a given week? Now we're going to shrink this down a little bit so that we can look at it. Now the first thing we're going to do is we're going to say which item gives us the most utility per dollar. And so that would be the yoga class. So we'll go to 1 yoga class, and that's going to cost us $3. The next thing we're going to do is go to another yoga class. That second yoga class is again going to cost us $3, and it's going to give us 8.33 utils per dollar. So let's also keep track of the total utility here also. So it's costing us $3, and we're going to be getting 30 utils of satisfaction. On that second yoga class, we're going to be getting 25 utils. Now let's see. Is the first movie going to give us more satisfaction, or the third yoga class? It looks like we're going to go to another yoga class, and it's going to cost us $3. And it's going to give us 21 utils. And again, 1 yoga class costs us $3, gives us 16 utils. Now, in our next option, and we know that we still have $12 left in our budget because we spent 12 and our budget was 24. I'm going to actually say it's time to go to a movie. And I'm going to go to the movie because the movie here, that first movie is going to yield more satisfaction per dollar than the fifth yoga class. And it's going to cost me $8. Now I only have $4 left in my budget because 12 plus 8 is 20 and $4 remains in our budget. And doing that is going to yield 30 utils of satisfaction. So that first, 40. That first movie is going to yield 30 utils of satisfaction. Now, with the remaining $4 I have in my budget, I cannot afford to go to a movie, so in order to maximize my total utility, I'm going to attend yet another yoga class. And that fifth yoga class, 5th yoga class is going to yield 14 utils of satisfaction. This procedure will allow us to maximize our total utility. So let's see what our total utility is. If we add up all of the marginal utilities of each item that we're consuming, the first yoga class, the second yoga class, the third yoga class, the fourth yoga class, the first movie, and the fifth yoga class, we will have maximized our total utility at 146 utils. There is no other way to maximize total utility. Something you might be curious about is, well, how come we are going to choose an item that gives us less marginal utility over another item that gives us more marginal utility? And the reason why is because the marginal utility per dollar for attending, say, that first yoga class is twice as much as going to the movies. And therefore, it's going to increase our total utility much more than spending money on the movies. Say, for example, we just went to 3 movies. What would be our total utility? Well, let's take a look. Our total utility of going to 3 movies is 105 utils. So this definitely isn't going to maximize our total utility. What if we spent all of our budget on doing yoga classes? If we spent all of our budget on doing yoga classes, we would have a lot of diminishing marginal utility in this section. We're over 4 or 5 yoga classes a week. We're just super tired and we really don't want to be there, or we're bored, or some other combination of factors. And so if we spent all of our money, $3 times 8 yoga classes on yoga classes, we wouldn't have maximized our total utility. We'd only have 117 total utils. So therefore, we see that total utility is maximized with our budget of $24 at 146 utils. So how many yoga classes will we take? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And how many movies will we choose to watch? Only 1. And again, this is specific to this individual in this time period. It's a ceteris paribus situation, and it does assume diminishing marginal utility. So please contact me if you have any questions about how to solve these problems. I do advise that you take a look at the rest of the chapter, which I'm not going to lecture on, but do contact me if you have any questions on it. Thanks and have a great week.